If you pay close attention, you will notice a pattern of when Satan comes to tempt you. It's probably in similar circumstances each time when he comes, or, like every time you're tired, or every time you're sick, or every time you're stressed out, the spiritual warfare starts. 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." We need to be constantly sober, constantly alert, vigilant to the devil and his demons and his strategies, wise to them. And so here now, Jesus goes into the wilderness where he is tempted, where he is tested for 40 days. Now remember, Matthew writes this gospel to who? The Jews. Very good. We were sitting at lunch yesterday at my kitchen table, and I asked one of my kids, "Who is the Gospel of Matthew written to?" And he said, "The world?" I said, "No." "Christians?" "No." "The Jews. It's written to Jews." Jesus' testing in the wilderness for 40 days, listen, it parallels the testing of the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years. His testing in the wilderness for 40 days parallels the testing of the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years. The Apostle Paul even compares Israel's passing through the Red Sea to a baptism in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. They were baptized in the Red Sea and then led into the wilderness where they were tested, just as Jesus was baptized and then led into the wilderness where he was tested. If you're familiar with Israel's time in the wilderness in the Old Testament, then you know that Israel failed their test. They failed many tests in the wilderness. Israel failed miserably during their time of testing in the wilderness. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul uses Israel's failure in the wilderness as an example for us of what not to do, as a bad example. He said in 1 Corinthians 10, he's saying, don't be like Israel in the wilderness. Don't follow their example. But Jesus, in contrast to Israel in the wilderness, Jesus passed the test. He passed the test in the wilderness. In a sense, Jesus was a substitute for Israel, succeeding where they failed, just as Jesus is a substitute for us, succeeding where we fail, and we do fail. Jesus gets right what we get wrong. He's the perfect sinless substitute, making him the perfect sinless sacrifice for us. Look at verse 2 again. It says, when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him, he said, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. Now there's no doubt in Satan's mind that Jesus is the Son of God. So if here, when he says if you are the Son of God, if has the meaning of since. Since you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. And if you're taking notes, the word bread here is actually the Hebrew word for donuts. It's crispo cremo in the Hebrew, believe it or not. Now here's the thing. Give me your attention. This test for Jesus was the temptation to use his divine power to satisfy his flesh. It's the temptation to use his divine power to satisfy his flesh. Jesus was starving to death. Literally, he's at the point of death. And Satan says, since you're the Son of God, turn some stones into bread. Just use your divine power to alleviate your suffering, to alleviate your hunger. Use your deity. Take your deity out. You don't have to suffer like this. Jesus, you have the power to fix this with a snap of the fingers. You can fix this. Now, why does this temptation matter? Why can't Jesus just use his deity here and make some bread? It doesn't seem like that bad of a thing. I mean, he has this need after all. He's hungry. Why can't he just turn on his deity here and turn some stones into bread so he has something to eat? The reason is, listen, the reason is because Jesus is our example of a life lived in the power of the Spirit. And he's demonstrating to us that you can live a life in the power of the Spirit. You can live a Spirit-filled life that overcomes temptation by the power of the Holy Spirit. If he uses his divine power here to turn the stones into bread, then that means the Holy Spirit is not enough for a victorious life. That means the Holy Spirit can only get you so far in the Christian life. But it's not going to see you through. That it's not enough power. And if he does use his divine power here, well, then we could say, well, Jesus himself couldn't even live the Spirit-filled life. He couldn't even do it. And if he can't do it, we sure can't do it. Why even try? And so this is an important temptation here, because he is walking in the Spirit. He's trusting the Spirit. And now there's the temptation just to turn the deity on and use the deity to alleviate his suffering. Right? And when you and I are walking in the Spirit, there's that temptation to walk in the flesh, to trust in ourselves, to trust in our own power, our own ability, to take matters into our own hands.